Welcome to the Uncommon Living podcast, where we host dialogues in human resilience. I'm Prof Seager. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University, and I'm the CEO of the Morozko Ice Bath Company. In today's episode, we have a lecture that I delivered to the Salt Therapy Association at their conference in Orlando, Florida. I call the lecture Anatomy of the Cold because it covers some of the unique physiological or anatomical features of the human body that are related to living at the edge of the cold, salt water. You're going to see connections in my lecture to other podcast episodes, in particular with Professor Stephen Cunnane, who talks about how the composition of the brain relies upon DHA, an omega-3 fatty acid available most abundantly in aquatic life. You're going to see a connection to the episode that I did with Professor Denis Blondet on brown fat and its benefits to human physiology. And of course, you will see the connection to the episode I did with Leo Tonkin, the founder of Salt Chamber, that provides salt rooms where you can breathe in salt to the benefit of your lungs and bronchial tubes. The defining feature of human physiology is the enormous brain. Larger, more complex than any other creature on God's earth. You should be proud of yours. You should take care of it. What you might not realize is that it is made up mostly of fat, cholesterol, trace minerals. Your brain is built from fat. And the question is, what kinds of fats and minerals are essential for healthy brain development? They are the omega-3 fatty acids that you get from marine life, that you get from fish and shellfish, the iodine, the iron, the magnesium, and the zinc, and the copper. The trace metals that are in the ocean are essential to your brain, to human physiology. They are what make us unique. No salt water, no human race. There are several anatomical features unique to human beings that help support this idea that we are aquatic creatures. One of them is subcutaneous fat. This is the type of fat right below the skin that me and a lot of other people have plenty of, and we want to get rid of. Another is the nostrils that we have on our faces. They point down, not out. And they point down so that we can dive into the water and we can fish and we can forage. And then you can see we walk on two legs, and this is why. It is so we can wade into the water and either spear fish or gather nets or gather plants out of the water. This two legs down and two hands out allows us to fish and forage like no other creature could. But the combination of the enormous brain and the two legs, it leads to some problems. And in particular, the problem is childbirth, because this enormous head has to fit through the birth canal. And human anatomy is pushed to the limits at which that brain can get no bigger in a pelvis that is still able to walk on two legs. So this is why human babies are born into dangerous, painful circumstances with helpless, underdeveloped brains. Where were our ancient grandmothers giving birth? It was in the water, because water has this analgesic effect. It enhances the safety of the childbirth, and it is principally why human babies are born with an instinct to swim. You watch National Geographic, baby giraffe drops out of its mother and it's running around on the grasslands like 2 minutes later. That's not the human baby. The human baby has an instinct to swim, and it will lose it several months after childbirth if it doesn't have experience with the water. But at the moment that it is born, it knows it is an aquatic creature. Now the question is, what was the temperature of that water? Because you couldn't be blamed for thinking it should be warm. The oldest human fossils are found in East Africa on the equator. So you might think that our ancient grandmothers were in the warm water, but they weren't. It was 70,000 years ago, an enormous volcanic eruption. All the ash goes into the atmosphere and it plunges the earth into years of winter. It sets off a new ice age. And anthropologists estimate that there were only 5,000 human beings on the entire face of the earth as a result of this ice age. It's called a population bottleneck. Those human beings were eking out this aquatic existence between the glacier and the cold ocean. There are 3 modern glaciers in the mountains of East Africa today. When you go back tens of thousands of years to the Ice Age, even though this is the equator, it was covered with ice. The water that our ancient ancestors lived in was cold, and babies could defend themselves against that cold with something called brown fat. So this illustration shows you where the fat depots inside an infant are packed with mitochondria. White fat is for energy storage, but brown fat has extra mitochondria for something called non-shivering thermogenesis. A baby's muscles are not developed enough to shiver to keep the baby warm. So when a baby is born into the cold water, the brown fat is what keeps the baby warm. It burns glucose, it burns triglycerides, it burns fatty acids from the bloodstream just to generate the heat. Babies are very well defended against the cold by their brown fat. But if you don't get cold, you lose brown fat. It used to be that medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in adult human beings. And I'm going to get to how they discovered that wasn't true. But first, we're still thinking about the ancient ancestors and what happens when the planet warms up. What happens when the glaciers recede? What happens when the ocean levels come back up and people move into the middle of the continent? They move away from the ocean. It turns out that walking on 2 legs is a huge advantage when you are stalking prey. Now, it slows you down. All the 4-legged creatures are faster than the human being, but the human being uses less energy per mile, and they have the advantage of being able to sweat. So now our ancient ancestors could track game through the inland continent and run it down until that game was exhausted, especially if it was in the heat. So the human body, both through its 2 legs, its ability to sweat, and its brown fat, is very well adapted to both the cold and the heat. And this is one of the most fundamental advantages that we have over other animals and competing predators. What that meant was we needed salt, because sweat doesn't just put water on our skin to cool the body through evaporation. Sweat also carries with it minerals. Salt became a precious commodity. This is before the Industrial Revolution. The human beings living far from the ocean needed that salt so they could thermoregulate in the heat. And so this is a book about the history of salt and its essential role in the pre-industrial economy of the human race. Salt was at the center of human flourishing. And there were 3 ways to get it. You could eat or drink it. So it would go through your gastrointestinal tract, and it would have their impacts first. Then it would be mediated by everything that happens in your intestines and the way it is absorbed into your body. So eating and drinking is what we usually think of, and that's why the salt shaker is on the cover. But you can also absorb it transdermally. When you're in the ocean water, you will absorb salt through your skin from the ocean. And then the last way, which I don't have to tell you about because you know about, is to breathe it in. When you're breathing it in, it enters, of course, through the lungs, through the bronchial tubes, and has a more direct route into your bloodstream, but it will affect, in a positive way, all of those tissues that it touches first. So when you get it transdermally, same thing. It will go straight into your bloodstream, but it will affect the skin first. These 3 routes are all critically important, and they are absent, for the most part, except for eating or drinking. They are absent from our modern lives because we no longer live like our ancestors did. We no longer get hot in the summer. because we have central air. We no longer get cold in the winter because we have heated leather seats in our SUVs. We no longer get the sunshine because we live indoors. We are so disconnected from the natural environment that our bodies are built for that it is no wonder we get sick. I'm going to talk to you about some of that reconnection, because here's what happens if you don't get enough cold. These are scans of cancer patients. The way that you image cancer is you inject a radioactive glucose tracer. It is taken up preferentially by the tumors, and then you find the radiation inside the body. And when scientists and physicians at the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York went looking at these scans for brown fat, because brown fat will also take up glucose, they discovered that more than 95% of the adult Americans scanned had no detectable brown fat at all. You might say, well, what's the big deal with no brown fat? But brown fat is not just for keeping you warm. It is an essential secretory organ. That is, it will secrete factors that help protect the brain. It will convert inactive forms of thyroid hormone into the active form. So your brown fat, if you have it, is in constant communication with your thyroid to modulate both the thyroid function and the metabolism. Without brown fat, you are a thyroid disorder waiting to happen. I've met people, because I live in Arizona, who spent their whole lives in the desert and in the warmth. And of course, they are a thyroid condition, either hyper or hypo, too active or inactive, that can be corrected by cold exposure that will recruit new brown fat to their body. Here's Lewis Pugh. Lewis Pugh is a British adventurist. He's an environmentalist, and he swims the frozen oceans of the world to call attention to environmental problems. This is him about to dive into the Antarctic Ocean. Lewis Pugh is the most extreme example of the way the human body is cold adapted. You don't have to start like Lewis. If you're just getting started in cold plunge therapy, go cold enough to gasp, so the water makes you suck your breath in, and then go long enough to shiver. It might not be more than 4 or 5 minutes, and you know that you've started the thermogenesis process. You're signaling your body to recruit brown fat. Too little cold will make you sick, just like too much. And this is the classic hormetic stress curve. You're looking for not too little, not too much, that part in the middle that keeps you healthy, because it's stressful, but it is a beneficial stress. So why do you want the brown fat? Better metabolism, increased fertility, associated with better brain health, prevention of Alzheimer's, better cancer treatment outcomes, improved sex hormone levels, all associated with cold plunge therapy, which leads us to the most sensitive population of all, pregnant women. The women that I've talked to are consistent. They've had experiences that are consistent with the epidemiological data. When a woman is pregnant, it's extremely metabolically demanding. She's in a physiological state of what's called insulin resistance. And as that pregnancy advances, you can imagine she and her baby are dramatically affected by metabolism. Her metabolism may tip from physiological insulin resistance, which is fine and healthy, into pathological insulin resistance, which could be in the extreme gestational diabetes. Cold plunge therapy will help her maintain her insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, improve her sleep, and is associated with better birth outcomes, which is important because this is my friend Ben Bickman. He's at BYU, and he wrote this book, Why We Get Sick. Every leading cause of death from chronic illness in the United States originates in insulin resistance. Cold plunge therapy fixes it. And the metabolic state of the pregnant woman is the single most important predictive risk factor later in a diagnosis of autism in the child. So this is very timely because Secretary Kennedy and Jay Bhattacharya are saying, we're going to announce this month our best understanding of what causes autism. I interviewed Richard E. Fry, who's both a biophysicist and a medical doctor who treats autistic children, and he explained it to me. It is in the metabolism of the mother and the infant. It is then that mitochondria steer neurological development. And if the metabolism isn't right, that brain that we should be so proud of does not develop in typical ways. It becomes vulnerable to an immunological event like a fever, like encephalitis, swelling in the brain, that triggers the onset of autism. And guess what? Metabolic therapies targeting the mitochondria will improve treatment outcomes for children. This is why it's important to get cold. For men, erectile dysfunction is the earliest clinical marker of metabolic dysfunction. And it's because the smooth muscle tissue that control blood flow, they are signaled by nitric oxide. It used to be medical doctors didn't think that that nitric oxide was produced by the mitochondria. Turns out it is. When the mitochondria are healthy and they can produce the nitric oxide to signal vasodilation, circulation throughout the body, including the penis, improves. For men, it's critical to get some cold to take care of, critical to their sexual health to get some cold and take care of their sex hormone levels. This is my personal story. This is what got me into cold. And this is the cover of the book, Uncommon Testosterone. I was 52, I was living alone, I was separated and headed for a divorce. I knew I needed to start taking care of myself. I'd already lost a lot of weight, and I knew I needed blood labs. One of the labs that men get at that age is called the prostate-specific antigen. This is a PSA test, and mine came back like this. It was too high. I spent maybe 20 minutes, on WebMD or on the internet, and I was convinced I was going to die of prostate cancer. Because that's the way the internet works, you get all these catastrophic thoughts that are going through your mind, and it tells you you should run to a urologist, you should have a prostate exam, you should have a biopsy, you should have a prostatectomy, or you're going to die. And I didn't want any of that, because the men that I talked to said that these were the most miserable, wretched experiences of their lives, and I would have been okay with that, except for the lifetime of erectile dysfunction that follows a prostatectomy. So I was determined I wasn't going to visit a urologist. I was going to use what I call intermittent keto, going in and out of a ketogenic diet, which is good for inflammation, and ice bath every day to try and get this inflammation out of my prostate. It was 4 months before I had the guts to go back to the lab and retest for my PSA, and it worked. I dropped from 7.0, which is elevated risk of cancer. It doesn't mean I had cancer, but elevated risk of cancer, to 1.8. I did it a little later. I went down to 1.1, and I took the whole male health panel, which includes total testosterone, and I got this result back from the lab. So this is 6 months of daily cold baths because I thought I was going to die. And what happened to my testosterone is it jumped up to 1180 nanograms per deciliter, which this lab report says is too high. Now I finally have the guts to go to the urologist. Now I say, look, I'm in the clear. I don't have any elevated risk of anything. Look, doc, I'm doing fine. But instead of getting a pat on the back and congratulating me for, treating myself, the doctor says, I don't believe it. He thinks I'm on steroids. He doesn't care about my PSA. He thinks I must be juicing because he takes a look at this fat college professor. I'm fairly sedentary. I mean, I value my brain way. I wish you could see it on Instagram instead because I don't have six-pack abs, This is what I'm trying to take care of. And he goes, this guy must be on the roids. He says, I want one more test. It's for luteinizing hormone. I didn't know what luteinizing hormone was. I got to go look that up. He says luteinizing hormone will stimulate a man's gonads to make testosterone. If the testosterone is high and the luteinizing hormone is low, he would have known that I was taking steroids and he would advise me to get off of the juice because he thinks, like most medical doctors, erroneously, that high testosterone levels are associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. They are not. High testosterone protects against prostate cancer, but that doesn't mean that the urologists understand that yet. Had my luteinizing hormone tested too high. This is what cold plunge therapy does for you. It will restore your mitochondrial function. It will improve your metabolism, balance your sex hormone levels. How does it do that? It makes testosterone from cholesterol. Cholesterol is converted into a steroid called pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is the metabolic precursor to all of the sex hormones, including testosterone. You can see the molecular similarity. But where does this conversion take place? on the inner membrane of your mitochondria. If you don't have enough mitochondria, or your mitochondrial membranes are defective, or there's some mitochondrial dysfunction, like we all accumulate throughout age because we don't have the right nutrients, magnesium, zinc, because we're not getting enough cold and we don't have any brown fat, then it is no wonder your testosterone will be low. Well, I wrote an article about my experiences. Nobody, reads my articles except for one guy. And it turns out to be a pretty important guy. I remember this December 2022. I landed in Iceland. My phone has been off for hours. I wanted to see the northern lights. And I turned my phone back on and it starts going. And there's all these notifications from my friends saying, hey, you're on the Joe Rogan show. I go, hang on a second. I think I would know if I was on Joe Rogan. And they're like, no, he's put your picture up. He's read your article. He's told David Goggins he is now doing his ice bath before he does his exercise to boost his testosterone level. People started writing to me from all over the world. They finally read the article. They started using the protocol. It's called pre-cooling. You do the ice bath, you do some light exercise to rewarm. Men and women. We've now got, this is the basis of the Uncommon Testosterone book. We've now got multiple case studies of people doing this and elevating their testosterone levels. In one woman's case, she's menopausal. She doesn't even have ovaries. She was on hormone replacement therapy, 10x increase in her testosterone at the age of 62. And of course, her clinician got her off of the supplemental hormones. So why have people been slow to boost their testosterone? It's this myth for men, that somehow high testosterone, because it's anabolic, will feed a prostate tumor. That is not the case. All of the data contradicts that mythology. But, opinions in medicine, they change slow. Here's another interesting fact. All those hormones that are produced during a cold plunge, they are associated with love. According to Helen Fisher, there are 3 different brain systems of love. They are associated with lust, which is testosterone, romantic love, which is driven by dopamine, norepinephrine, and that deep romantic attachment or familial attachment, which is driven by oxytocin and vasopressin. The cold plunge therapy produces all of them. So when you do a cold plunge with your partner, if you can talk your partner into the ice bath and you gaze into one another's eyes, you hold one another's hands, you breathe together, you cannot help but fall in love with the person that you're doing this, because that is what your brain is telling you to do. I've had this experience. We have replicated it in other couples, and it's more effective than talk therapy. Let's talk about cancer a little bit more. Cancer originates in disorders of mitochondria. Cancer is a metabolic disease. Now, after you have cancer, metabolic treatments can improve or metabolic therapies can improve cancer treatment outcomes. But the best way to prevent cancer is to have healthy mitochondria. This is Thomas Seyfried's book, Cancer is a Metabolic Disease, that explains some of the science. This is a paper that came out in 2022, where this team of researchers in Sweden, of course, they have lab animals. In this case, it's mice, and they will implant tumors. And the fate of these lab animals is to die of cancer so that we can study them. They took a group of these mice and they exposed them to cold, kind of mild cold, 4 hours a day. And they found that the cold exposed group lived longer and the tumors grow more slowly. Why? Because they have brown fat. And the brown fat sucks the glucose, clears it right out of the bloodstream, and starves the tumor cells that would otherwise thrive on it. Here are 2 case studies. One of them is Dean Hall, who swam the entire length of the Willamette River. When he went in, he had chronic leukemia and a lymphoma. He knew that that leukemia was going to kill him. He wanted to do something to inspire other cancer patients. When he came out of the Willamette River 3 weeks later, leukemia gone, right? This is a woman with 4 daughters. She's a single mom. 2 of her daughters have special needs. I got a call. She's in the hospital. They found an inoperable, untreatable tumor on her liver. They can't operate because the liver is just all blood vessels. And she had a history of a bleeding disorder, which meant if they cut into her liver, she just might bleed to death right on the operating table. So I went to the hospital and I talked to the woman. She says, they tell me what I have to do is watchful waiting. Now, what the hell is watchful waiting? A tumor comes out of nowhere on a woman's liver. What are you going to do? Keep an eye on it? because there's watchful waiting is not a therapy. She says, I feel like I'm going to leave my kids without a mom. What will I do? I said, you are going to do the same thing that Dean Hall did. You're going to do the same thing that I did. You're going to get into that ice bath. You're going to get the carbs out of your diet. You're going to do this every day like I did because you're afraid you're going to die. She had a scan 6 months later, and that tumor shrunk. Then they locked down the hospitals. No more scans because of COVID. Anything that could be scheduled was called elective. And she made me promise I would never take her to the hospital again because she couldn't go at that time with her kids. She's still alive. Of course she's still alive. She doesn't care about her liver tumor anymore. She's not going to have it imaged anymore. Instead, she cares about her metabolism. She cares about her mitochondria. She knows that there's nothing that the hospital can do for her anyway. And then I get text messages like this, 1 or 2 a month. People who are augmenting their cancer treatment with their cold plunge therapy and shrinking their tumors. I got one more for you. This is back to the brain. This is my mother. It was 2 weeks before she died. And you can tell she's not in good shape. It was seed oils and carbohydrates that finished her off. She is in late stage dementia. She does not recognize me. That's a picture of her father, for whom I am named. And there's a glint of recognition in her eye. This is what she's eating for breakfast. Cream of wheat made with apple juice and Ensure. If she finishes that, she gets a cookie. It takes her hours to eat this cookie because at this time, she didn't have motor control, just a little bit in her dominant hand. She's right-handed. And so she would nibble on that cookie and it would allow her nurse sort of a break. 2 weeks later, she went to sleep and she didn't wake up. Because the mitochondria are critical to brain function, if you do not take care of the brain metabolism, the brain can no longer take care of you. Alzheimer's, now sometimes called type 3 diabetes, is a metabolic disease. This is why you need cold plunge therapy, because the brown fat you will recruit into your body will protect your brain. Now, not everybody is going to get into the ice bath. Even though, according to one data set, something like 80% of Americans suffer from chronic oxidative stress. They're not necessarily going to get into the ice bath because it hurts. Nobody enjoys this. Joe Rogan doesn't enjoy this. I don't enjoy this. We do this anyway. The first 15 seconds before you get into the ice bath are the worst part of the ice bath. Then you get in and you're like, what am I doing? This is crazy. I should get out. And then 30 seconds in, you're like, what was I even worried about? I'm fine. I'll stay in here for another minute and a half or so. And that's all it really takes is 2 to 4 minutes of freezing temperature, but not everybody's going to do it. This is new. This is the Morozko mineral bath. For those people that are never going to do an ice bath, this, I can't even call it a hot tub. This is what is going to make the hot tub obsolete, because there are 3 things about natural hot springs from all around the world. Remember, I went to Iceland. One of the things that people do in Iceland is they go into the hot springs. I did that. You can do this. I've done it in Colombia. I've done it in El Salvador. I've done it in different places in the United States. There are 3 things that every hot spring has in common. The first one is minerals, the salt that our ancient ancestors relied upon. It's in the hot springs because this water is coming out of some ancient volcano and it's bubbling out, to the surface of the earth, and it is rich in those minerals that we need. So minerals. The second one is the chemistry. It is always reductive in its chemistry, not oxidative. Now, when you have a regular hot tub and you got to put a ton of chlorine in there, you create a poisonous oxidative condition. But the chemistry in a natural hot spring is reductive. And is the sulfur chemistry, the potential between the sulfur and the sulfate redox couple that control that chemistry. This is the first in the world that incorporates hydrogen. So there's no chlorine in here, and it has an ozone phase that will disinfect the water. But the Morozko mineral bath, it incorporates hydrogen so that you can have that reductive ORP. This is a negative ORP, just like you'd get in the natural hot springs. And the third one is, of course, it's grounded. All Morozko tubs are grounded. They're made of stainless steel. They are connected through the ground wire in your home right into the earth. So as soon as you get in, you get the electrons from the earth that will rebalance your static charge. This is a brand new product. We're filming it from the last day this morning back in Phoenix as I'm talking to you, and we are shipping the first one to Dallas, Texas. Noah Syndergaard, who is a pitcher, he used to be a pitcher for the Mets, he bought it. We invented it for him because he texted me and he said, can't you do something like a hot tub? And I said, let me look into that. And I discovered that the typical hot tub in the United States is a poisonous piece of crap. This will make that hot tub obsolete. And as far as Morozko goes, this is me in one of my ice baths. That's Daniel in the background. This one is on a bench in our production studio. It's the second biggest ice bath that we make. And you can see how it works. It makes its own ice. So I'm up to my ears now in it. We put Epsom salt in there so that you can get the transdermal absorption of the minerals. You can put other salts or other sulfate salts in there if you like. And typically what I do is I climb in and I record one of those Instagram videos. If I have a bad day and it takes 3 or 4 takes, I might be in here for 15 minutes. And that's a lot of dose. It takes a long time to warm up in the Phoenix sunshine if I don't get these videos right on the first take. But you can go to our Instagram and you can see them. We make several different models. And so some of them, of course, are for businesses or hotels or sports teams, and some of them are for home. This is how you can couple the cold water that was always accompanying our ancestors' involvement, their life in the aquatic environment that they lived at the earliest, like I'm going far back into the origins of the human race as we know it. This is how you can bring it to yourself and your customer and plus up the halo therapy that you're already familiar with. And I know there might be questions. There's no homework and there's no quiz, but if you raise your hand, I think there's somebody with a microphone who can help you out. Here's somebody in the front. Okay, does a cold shower work as well as a plunge? The people who do the best research on cold plunge therapy are in Finland. And they did a study comparing partial body cold water immersion to whole body cold water immersion. And it speaks exactly to this question, because when you're in the shower, you can only have the cold water on part of your body. The effects are not the same. There are a lot of benefits from the cold shower. You will activate brown fat. You will get metabolic benefits. But cold showers, they just make me angry. I've hated every minute of every cold shower I've ever taken. And it was this Finnish study that told me why. When you first get into the cold, it activates the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system. So that's the fight or flight response. For me, when I started, it was like a bunch of swear words would somehow help me out. And that's the anger part. When you are whole body, then the dive reflex takes over. The dive reflex will lower your heart rate. It will put your brain into a meditative state. You will relax. It's called the rest and digest, or parasympathetic division of the central nervous system. So you go into the cold shower, you will get revved up, and you will never get the dive reflex to bring you back down.
Actually, I have 2 questions.
You only get one question.
First is, you mentioned doing cold plunge before working out. Any benefits, pros or cons for doing it after your workout?
Don't do it after.
Don't do it after.
There's really good science on this. And now if you go on social media, you'll see a lot of videos that say, cold plunging doesn't work. And they're very popular right now. It's true that if you do the cold plunge after, it will blunt what Huberman calls hypertrophy. So you've worked your muscles really hard and your muscles are going to be sore. And you can reduce what's called delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, by getting into the cold plunge and reducing the inflammation. The problem is the inflammation is there for a reason. The inflammation is there to signal anabolic processes in your muscle, to bring them back stronger. You do reduce soreness if you do the cold plunge after your exercise, but you also, for men, reduce testosterone and reduce this muscle building response. Don't do your cold plunge after your exercise like your track coach or somebody told you to do in high school. Do it before. pre-cool your workout. This will give you a boost in peak muscle power output. It will postpone fatigue, and it will improve your recovery later. So, I sell ice baths for a living, and if you're going to use it after your workout, then don't buy one from me. Use it before your workout.
The second question would be, again, benefits of the hot cold contrast, people sauna and then cold plunge, and should that be done or
this
together?
Is another really important thing. I now make a hot tub and I make an ice bath, and don't combine those. Go opposites. If you're going to do wet cold, now there's dry cold. You can go to cryocon. You can do a cryo chamber and you can get dry cold. But if you're going to do wet cold, like in an ice bath, do dry heat. And there's a physiological reason for this. When you get into the ice bath, those endothelial cells communicate with the smooth muscle tissue that controls blood circulation. They cause vasoconstriction. They clamp down on the blood flow to your limbs. They keep the blood in your core and in your head, where all the brown fat is, to defend your core body temperature. So that's vasoconstriction in the cold. When you go into the dry sauna, vasodilation. Now you're in an environment that is warmer than body temperature. So, maybe 180 or something like that. And your body has to defend core against the heat. What does it do? It sweats. It's the evaporation of the sweat from your skin that carries heat out into the air. So your body will vasodilate to get the blood to the skin where the blood can be cooled. And so when you go back and forth between dry sauna and ice bath, you get vasodilation, vasoconstriction, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. It's a wonderful workout for your smooth muscle tissue. The problem when you go into the hot tub is also vasoconstriction. And most people don't believe this. Most people say, oh, I go into the hot tub, I feel so hot. I start to sweat. But your body knows. There's a term called hydromiosis, which Google thinks is a spelling mistake. But hydromiosis is this phenomenon. Your body will not sweat into the tub because it's not going to cool you off. You cannot evaporate into hot water. Your body knows this, even to the point where if your skin is saturated with your own sweat and it's very humid out, your body stops sweating because your body knows when the sweat is being evaporated and when it isn't. This is why pre-football season in Florida is so dangerous for kids, because they'll sweat, they will saturate their body, they'll stop sweating, and they don't realize they're about to hit hyperthermia. You got to get them in the ice bath before that adversely impacts their brain. So what I'm saying is, in the hot tub, anything that is still dry, that isn't in the water, yes, you will sweat through that. But the rest of your body will not sweat. Combine the ice bath with the dry sauna, not with the hot tub. Hot tub is for people, when you can get hydrogen in there, who can't do the ice bath, because the hydrogen will relieve the chronic oxidative stress into which most people who don't ice bath live.
Back to the plunge, changing your cholesterol to testosterone. Will that, if you have high cholesterol, will that permanently lower your cholesterol?
No.
No.
And you should be thankful that it does not. Cholesterol is one of those myths, just like testosterone in the prostate is one of those myths, just like the medical doctors used to think the endothelial cells didn't rely upon mitochondria is one of those myths. Cholesterol is one of those myths. And the idea that high cholesterol is dangerous for your health is dead wrong. Triglycerides are dangerous. You should be watching your triglyceride to HDL ratio. If that gets up over 2, it's an indication that you are metabolically unwell. And it's not the triglycerides necessarily, it's that that's a marker of metabolic dysfunction. But high cholesterol is associated with longer life. Now, if this thing, high cholesterol, is supposed to be killing us, why do people with high cholesterol live longer? There is a hormetic curve. There is a point at which it becomes unhealthy. But the cholesterol recommendations that are now promulgated throughout all the medical institutions are dead wrong. High cholesterol, relative to those recommendations, is healthier for you than low cholesterol. Marty Makary, he's now the commissioner at the FDA. Before he was appointed commissioner, he wrote a book, and it was called Blind Spots. And in that book, because he's a physician, he was at Johns Hopkins, he was a faculty member. In that book, he covers, I think it's something like 6 medical misconceptions. And that is just scratching the surface of all the things that the medical institutions and most medical doctors believe that are actually going to harm you. Now, if you are low in cholesterol, then you will not have the building blocks for testosterone. And yes, the people in the lowest quartile of cholesterol also have low testosterone. You want to get your cholesterol up to get your testosterone up. But I talk to a lot of men who do the ketogenic diet, or they go in and out of ketosis, they do the ice bath, and they will send me a lab saying, oh my God, my total cholesterol is up over 350. And I will text them back and say, congratulations, mine is too. Because I've got all the building blocks for testosterone and other sex hormones. My brain has the cholesterol it needs. Cholesterol is protective against certain, well, it's all-cause mortality that causes you to live longer, protective against certain cardiovascular injuries. You do not want low cholesterol, just like you don't want a prostatectomy without trying cold plunge therapy first.